All right. Our last speaker is our keynote. We have a keynote each day. And typical of me, I said, Ellie, you want to be our keynote speaker? And it was, so be it. So Ellie's our closing speaker for the day. And I didn't meet you until 2022, right? So I started working with the community here, the community in, well, I'll give a little backstory because we've got time, since that's the last speaker. I was up at Southport, and I was actually competing in a diving competition there. And I heard about this young guy that was, for 2 weeks, he was doing language from 9 to 12 with these adults. And it wasn't the fact that it was some young guy doing it. I thought, how can adults be away from work 3 hours a day for 2 weeks? And I said, I'm going to see who this kid is. And so I walked into this, where I found out he was here. And I was it here? Oh, next one down, I was in a new, okay, so I walked into the room, and there was this guy up front. He was doing something that looked like ASLA, but it was the kind of thing in watching him where you're working on a puzzle and you have a piece that looks like it should fit with another piece, and yet it doesn't fit. And that's kind of what I saw. But I also saw that it had promise, and he was doing something with it. So we talked, and that led to a long relationship. That he brought me back in 2015, and I started working with, at that time there was just one speaker left with Bart, and then, I don't know, maybe 14 adults. But Ellie was not part of that. And so I became, when I finally met her, her language was already strong, and I asked her, I said, how did you get to this point? It totally mystified me, because I had not heard of her prior to that. And in my mind, she's a legend. That says something. I don't know if people understand that, but that says something. So I'm going to turn this over to Ellie rather than say much more, and the floor is yours.
Okay, I'm going to be Ellie Buchanan, Gumbaynggirr Country, Nyanggan, Buchannan, Bularri, Gumbaynggirr Giingana. Saya Parwaya, kamu di wajar, Julumba, Yari Gay Giingana Bularri by Julum Kapu, Nyanggan kalau Bularri, Yari Gay Ayah Gay Julumba, Nyanggan Gay Manumi Parma. Yang saya Bularri keluar kali. Kaya pada ngajaran yang dikai, nganyung di Muurlay, nawa parang kaya kala nawa mana itu, kala nawa nakakal Gumbaynggirr Giingana, cuma di mama Giingana Gumbaynggirr. Ita kau pergi, kita ngajaran yang bandi kuyurin jururin. Kirwa kilunga karana ida payang iala kunuway kita kay kunubulun kay ida kay payang iala jalaya kay mura iyang pandingawa tungo ida kay ngata na rin dinar yake kurangan yung dinara na engga den buwaru kumamiyang pandingawa wo niyang pandi jang bokirwa, niyang pandi bawang hirwa, jurupin, kuyupin, kalagirwa, ayang gay Muurlay ngawa mama, engga da bunyi yang pandi ngawa, baru kumam jogar ni alagay. Saya kini gay, madawon, Ellie Buchanan, as I said, I'm a Gumbaynggirr woman. I grew up on Gumbaynggirr Country, just up on the mountain in Bularri, and later on moved down to the coast. two beautiful, sometimes small children, Lenny, who's 4, and Raya, who's 2. I wanted to pay respect to our old people, to our country, to our ancestors. Maybe always be surrounded by our culture and be able to pass our language on to our babies. And I also wanted to pay respect and highlight our old people who worked so hard to protect our language so that we could speak it. One thing that I want to point out, and that Dr Neyooxet Greymorning also pointed out, is that about 5 or 6 years ago, I knew about a handful of Gumbaynggirr words. And so I guess that's interesting to think about where I am today and what I can do with my language. And so I'm going to share a little bit with you today, my language growth. And as you can probably tell, I'm a little nervous. Okay, so I didn't grow up with language in my house, but my mother always made sure that we knew who we were as Gumbaynggirr people, even though we didn't have that language to connect us to country. When I was 18, I moved down to Coffs Harbour, and I later decided to get a diploma in early childhood education and care. I wanted to become a young mum, actually, and I thought, oh, maybe I'll go and do this first and work with young children that I can give back. And so one of my TAFE teachers, she recommended a preschool to me that I go and check out and apply to do some craft work there. And that preschool was Muurlay Aboriginal Preschool. I was there that, of course, I met Auntie Julie, who instilled that love of education and education centred around cultural safety and identity and nurture and love for those children for who they are every day. And it was there that I also had my first exposure to Gumbaynggirr being taught to those children. Clark was there teaching while I was on prac, and it was a little hard to comprehend at first. I guess like many of us coming from an education where we weren't exposed to language, or, you know, for me, from my own experience, there was no language or barely any recognition of Gumbaynggirr people or Gumbaynggirr Country aside from the Keynote every year. And so it was amazing to see that these children were not only recognised and valued for who they were every day, but language was a key part of their learning and grounding. I later took a full-time position at a small community preschool in Bularri, but continued to push myself even little bits at a time, continuing to build my language where I could. I attended online classes with Muurlay and a small course through TAFE with Uncle Muurlay, both of these necessary for my exposure to Gumbaynggirr. However, I saw rapid growth in my language after I began attending community classes in 2019. Again, these classes were run by Clark and Bevenak. Clark was teaching us through a method I learned was accelerated second language acquisition, ASLA, developed by Dr Neyooxet Greymorning. Clark would explain to us that English had no part in our classrooms, and that we were to respect each other's learning as a part of that. I'd come from a place in my language where I could sing some early childhood songs, but not really understand what they said. I had basic understanding of Gumbaynggirr sounds, and a range of single nouns and verbs. That's 2019. Before I started coming to community classes, I'd never heard of ASLA, but I instantly believed in its ability to develop language. My language ability was obviously growing rapidly, and there was a strong and dedicated community of learners around me. I would come to class each week, nervous and quiet, trying not to let my English brain take over, and every car trip I would go over the images again and again in my head. And when I went to work that week, I would put it into practice to make sure I'm using it and be ready for the next class. In 2020, after I'd been attending regular classes for a few months, Clark asked me at one of the Thursday morning classes if I would come on board with Buchannan to do some teaching at Muurlay once a week. My boss at Bularri happily supported me to do this. Bless her, she still paid me and let me just go. That was good. She supported me to go and do that, and then towards the end of 2020, Clark offered me a full-time position as language teacher with Bembenak, teaching across a range of early childhood centres and primary schools, all while Muurlay with my first Bularri learning, exposing him to language in the womb. I remember sitting at the Bembenak office, listening to these complex and long conversations between Bembenak crew, comprehending what they were saying. My receptive language was getting good at this point. My receptive language was getting good at this point, and I was building my expressive language. But these are important steps, I remembered. I knew my baby that was about to be born wasn't going to come out speaking. He would listen to me talk. He would watch and listen to my interactions with others, listen to me sing and tell stories, make connection and put images to what I did and the words that correlate to my actions and objects. And I would be there to guide his speaking when he was ready. And at that point I just felt like a baby in my language. And that was okay. In early 2021 and the plan to open a school was shared with me. The vision for the school was an immersion school, to be centred around country, culture and wisdom, developing the whole child and ensuring children are confident, happy, healthy and strong in their identity, strong in their language. Knowing Clark and the Gumbaynggirr working at Bembenak and seeing what they were doing with the language and community, I had no doubt that was going to happen and I wanted to be on that boat, on that Bible. I was offered the position of language teacher at the Gumbaynggirr Giingana Freedom School upon my return from maternity leave, to work collaboratively with a classroom teacher to deliver the school's curriculum in Gumbaynggirr. Now, I'm not one to think that I'm better at something than I actually am, and I knew stepping into that role was a huge task and not one to be taken lightly. So while on leave, I continued to attend language classes twice a week, bringing my Bularri with me, and picked up an extra day of teaching before I officially finished my leave. But I had something unique that pushed me as well, my language too. I had just birthed my beautiful Bularri, and as a mother, language only deepened the relationship and connection I had with my Bularri. But not only that, I was pushed by the understanding of the role that I as a mother and my baby played in creating speakers of Gumbaynggirr. Now I was raising a bilingual baby who has Gumbaynggirr as one of his first languages. We each have a part to play, a role to play, skills and strengths and a purpose. And I saw my purpose in my baby, in my language and in my community. 2022 was the year GGFS, now Nyanggan and Gumbaynggirr opened. We had Clark as the CEO/principal, support daily from the Buchannan, Michael Kirby supporting with the registration, one admin staff, one classroom teacher, one language teacher, one classroom, 14 students from kindergarten to year 2, and their amazing families. The vision for Nyanggan and Gumbaynggirr has always been immersion. Knowing that if we are truly set on revitalising language or rejuvenating language and developing a strong community of speakers of Gumbaynggirr, and the reality of already a minimal pool of proficient speakers, and less so of speakers who have a teaching qualification, it meant we needed to upskill our staff on the job until we were in a better position. This meant the school was established as a bilingual school, holding on to the vision of immersion for further down the track. Bembenak had already developed a strong relationship and partnership with Muurlay Aboriginal Preschool, with Muurlay officially transitioning into a bilingual school in 2020. This partnership and what Muurlay do is critical and crucial for transitioning into an immersion preschool. Internationally, immersion preschools and early learning continue to be the foundation of language revitalisation, with the research of Indigenous language revitalisation highlighting the early years as a critical time for language development. The earlier they learn, the more fluent they are able to become. Bembenak had been running language programs with Muurlay for a few years now, and this meant that most of the children entering the school, there was already at a rapid pace. The classroom teacher, Tani, and I worked collaboratively to deliver the school's curriculum in as much Gumbaynggirr as we could, whilst making it as immersive as possible. So much so that the children would sometimes call me out if I had spoke to them in English. It was something so terrible, because I guess it was. In 2022, I also enrolled in a Bachelor of Education, Early Childhood and Primary, because apparently I didn't think I was busy enough. Yep. And Lenny was beginning to say his first words, a mix of Gumbaynggirr and English. And it was a learning curve to notice where English was more dominant for him, so more dominant in our house, or more dominant in his world, and how to encourage him to speak Gumbaynggirr with me when I was still learning also. 2023 was the year my beautiful Bularri was born. The school grew again. Additional teachers and support staff, additional language teachers, additional classroom teachers and classrooms, and children from kindergarten to year 4. In 2023, we were also invited to Aotearoa to attend Waitangi Day and to visit a range of Māori immersion schools. This was an eye-opener for me, to see what potentially our future looked like. And although many years ahead of us, what was evident and what was at the core of their language movement was the development of the kohanga-rios, the language nest, where children attended Māori immersion preschools, which they fed into their primary schools and fed into their high schools. And this was in order to keep immersion and language strong without disruption of English. So when they were old enough, their families and elders were able to send them out into their community, to stand for their community and people, carrying themselves differently, staunch. And we want that for our children, to be fully grounded in who they are. In 2024, we grew again, open to children from kindergarten to year 6, new staff and families, and I was just back from maternity leave after having Raya, and I stepped into the role of language director at the school. This meant overseeing our language staff and their learning and teaching in the language at the school. 2024 also saw us piloting our first immersion class, consisting of majority of those students who began with us in 2022. So one day a week they would come with Clark and I, and they were not to speak any English with us, and we would not let them speak any English with us. And they knew that, and they were happy with that. The purpose of this, to try what this process looked like. How will these children function in a full immersion environment? What language do we need to learn and potentially create in order for our classrooms to function and complete Gumbaynggirr? What do we need to do to prepare for a transition of the whole school? And to continue to build these children's language so that they will role model to their peers what strong language speaking looks like. Lenny also began at Muurlay Aboriginal Preschool this year, where sometimes I hear his muggle during language classes. But I think this is something that we probably need to consider about Lenny growing up as Gumbaynggirr, with Gumbaynggirr as one of his first languages. Maybe he is muggle, or maybe he gets bored and he needs to be pushed in that space. And at his other mainstream daycare centres, what I'm noticing is him switching in between Gumbaynggirr and English as soon as he sees the people around him that he knows speak English. So he will walk through the door speaking Gumbaynggirr with me, saying something to me, oh, mimi ngaden yawang lubur, yani murai mulai jauh. And then he switch, when he sees his teacher, I just seen this car driving on the road. But the switch. And I wish I could just shelter him from that, but that's the reality of his world. Yeah. And so we are now 2025. school will prepare for its transition into an immersion school, beginning with the early years, a kindergarten cohort, supported through strong language programs at Muurlay Aboriginal Preschool and a strong language speaking qualified teacher with curriculum. We will continue to work on a curriculum for the whole school that fully supports the outcomes that meet our people and our community, meet what our people and community deem as successful and as important to us holistically, and that matter for community and country health. For my children, what has been interesting to watch and not always easy to work with is obviously that I speak as much Gumbaynggirr with them as I can, but Gumbaynggirr is not my first language, and as you've seen today, I haven't been learning for very long. Apart from a small pocket of Buchannan and Gumbaynggirr Freedom School, Girwa, their father, grandparents, aunts, uncles, teachers at their daycare, friends, they all speak English. And so it's hard because they understand that the world around them is English dominant. But language work is hard. Sometimes my brain is tired after a long day from speaking or dealing with life. Sometimes it's easy for me to fall back into English when I come home because I'm relaxed. And I'm mindful that my career, having a career with 2 young babies, means that I often am pulled away from them. So there is a guilt of juggling being with them and doing what's right for my community. But I know that it's not meant to be easy. I'm constantly reminded and reminding myself of our old people and what they went through for us to be where we are today. Their struggles and their fight for us to have access to so much language today, to more language than a lot of mobs unfortunately have access to. We have careers in a space like language where they used to be criminalised and shamed for even speaking. We can speak with our babies and community, children and families to have access to a school where their language and culture is not just valued, but celebrated every day. So Dr Neyooxet Baya menjadi mangara berjalan gaya gaya baya minggundi naingi lagu mereka berjalan dari ini. Any question? Why are they giving me?
Our deadliest Raya now speaking.
She's clever.
She's clever as Letty, I bet.
Yeah, it is. It's really interesting to see even Raya having Lenny to speak around her. Her language ability is already tenfold what Lenny's was at the same age. So it's pretty incredible to watch. Yeah.
Have you looked at offering things to families, like to help with families on speaking the language at home? Think about that.
Not specifically famous, but we do. Buchannan has run community classes for quite some time, and they're family orientated anyway. And so we're often all there with our babies and our children and our partners and our families anyway. And so that, I guess, that kind of just naturally happens in the space where you're talking about things that you can take home. But it is something to think about for the empowering and giving that language to mothers before they birth their babies, so they're prepared for when their babies come home.
I just want to say to Ellie, we do have our family come to the school once a week to learn their language so that when the kids go home, they know what we're talking about. And it's a good thing because I've been there for a while and I still can't talk language. But to me, I'm learning a little bit. Uncle Alex and I are one of the eldest residents, they call us. We are a helper and we connect with our children a bit. So yes, it's a bit hard. Some of the parents are learning very slowly, but they come every time when it's there. They come on the day when it's there. I give them bread. Oh, no. We have bacon coming every Monday. So when they have their little yarning time and their language time, when there's a lot of bread left over, I put it outside so they take it home. And I said, that's good. And they love it. And not only that, they come on at night time too now, don't they? Yeah. So even the teachers coming along.
Thanks, Dr. Jenny. Yep, I absolutely completely forgot that we offer classes to our families.
And one thing about our school too, what I just want to quickly say about our school, I'm leaving there this term. I'm going back to where I worked before. And when I go back to that school, I'm going to find it so different. Because I've been to the school about 3 years now, I think, or 2 years, I can't remember now. Gone that fast. But I find our school, where I was at the time now, our children are learning a lot of things about country. We go once a week, 3 times a week, but each class goes different days. And to me, I think that's a plus, because they're out there in country, they're knowing what they want to see and do. And Buchannan, where are you? There's some over there, some here, look at them. All our staff's here, which is lovely. Not all of them, but there are some of them here. And we go out and have a yarn. When I go back to the other school, the Department of Education, we don't do that. And that's a sad thing. The people in their system is more different to the ones in our language system. So when you come and have a look at our school, maybe tomorrow or Wednesday? Wednesday, is it? Yeah, Wednesday. It was a hard time to get that school, as Clark was one of them. He had that vision, like we all have a vision. We aim for it, go for it. If it doesn't work, try something else. But this Clark started this vision, and it started off as that many kids at that time, and his family was behind him, which was good. All his friends was behind him, they all pushed, and look where we've got today. So, and when we talk about preschools, the preschool that we're talking about, Bularri preschool, many years ago, the preschools was nominated by Social Fund. They nominated 15 schools along the coast, and we was one of them. And a couple of years later after that, we got our preschool in 1970, because I was one of the ASLA, and they wanted us to go self-management. All Aboriginal people run that school, preschools, to start off. And to me, I thought that was a plus for us, because they gave us an opportunity to do something for our people, for our workers that worked in the schools, and gave them an opportunity to look for other things. So when they did that for all the schools around the coast, then 15 schools, they're all self-management, run by Aboriginal people, which is lovely. And to me, that's giving our children of today and their next generation the opportunity to say, right, we can do it. Why do we come to meetings to listen to all these sorts of things about our people, our community, what we do in our school, in our area? And this is what it's all about. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about that. I'm not going to talk too much, but I'm saying but that's our school. Well, I say our school because it's called one. And, but to me, I am going to miss that school, but I'll come back, walk back now and again and have a yarn. But I can find it so different to where I was for them 3 years. I'm going to stay over and out now because I'm going. And we'll see you tomorrow. I think it's time to go.
I just had a comment.
Thank you, Ellie.
Regarding the extra families access to language. So just to expand upon what Ellie and some of the other people have said, that yeah, we definitely, it's very important that you have that community around you, especially in the homes, it's definitely going to help you. So our school is our flagship, our champion of that language effort, but we do have a lot of other language efforts going around. So mentioned that there was parenting classes at GGFS, Feminac, which is a proprietor of the startup school, offers multiple community classes. I think there's 2 weekly in Cox, one in Grafton, a couple down in Buchannan each week, so there's lots of avenues, and we like to spread them out across the footprint so that we're reaching different parts of the Gumbaynggirr community. Alongside that, and we also have supported by the Nyanggan program in multiple preschools across the area. We're in lots of schools. So for the adult learners, those community classes were really helpful, and it's a little bit of onus back onto the community themselves to get themselves to the classes, but then we help the younger generations by bringing language to them in the schools. But yeah, we always are looking for those different touch points, different avenues, because it's so important. You learn so much more when you have a whole person around you. And it's not just us, that's the efforts that Feminac's doing, but we've got more to buy. There's also down in Buchannan, Youth on Thursdays, is it? On Thursdays, I can't remember which day, but yeah, so there's heaps of opportunities. So sometimes we jump online, jump on social media, and see where something's happening. They're very welcome.
And Mum being a Gumbaynggirr really values families being a part of their children's education as well. So as Brooke said, and for some reason I forgot to mention, yes, we run weekly classes for our families on a Monday. I teach them. So but it's also a requirement, an enrollment requirement for our children, our families to engage in those language classes, and they have to attend a certain amount per term. And that is for the benefit of them, the benefit of their children, and the benefit of our whole community to be active in their children's language and in their language and in our community. So it is a requirement that they attend those classes. A lot of them want to come just because they want to come, but also it's important for community, so you need to be putting in the work as well. Yeah.
What was and possibly still is your biggest struggle with having your family not speaking language like you do?
Like my partner and family.
Yeah. Other family
I guess
members.
there's kind of 2 parts. Is one, sometimes I see my children struggle with not wanting to speak Gumbaynggirr around those that they know speak English. So seeing that and trying to support them to want to speak Gumbaynggirr even when they're around that space. And 2, for me, I don't anymore, but initially when I started learning Gumbaynggirr, I felt a lot of shame speaking around my mother because I didn't want to shame her. And I didn't want to make her feel bad about not having her language. So kind of dealing with that as well, and it's the same like if I'm around elders or aunties or uncles, sometimes I don't want to speak because I would never want to make anyone feel bad for not having access to that. So I guess there's kind of those aspects. Yeah.
I want to comment on some things.
Okay.
I'm not sure what you're worried about. I remember reading some of my student evaluations and I'm going, who is this madman teaching this course? Me. One of the things I wanted to point out about what has happened is really historic. People look to the Hawaiians as a model. What the Hawaiians did was they started an immersion class, and it took those kids 10 years before they got to grade 8. That was their pioneer class. They started in preschool, and there were kids that was in that preschool for 2 years and then went to kindergarten. So when you count the years that it took them to get to grade 8, it's 10 years. Clark has done it in 3. And people don't understand the relevance of that. One of the other things is issue about split family in English. Mariana Selby, who was when she was 15 years old, I met her. She was an exchange student. She didn't have any interest in learning Maori. I brought her around to a few powwows, and evidently, according to what she said, that impact on her. And then when my grandmother died, that had an impact on her. She became the person who taught teachers how to teach Maori. Now, her husband never became a Maori speaker, but her children became first language speakers of Maori. And Mariana would go all around New Zealand doing workshops and talks and such. And being the curious person that I sometimes can be, I asked her husband, how does it feel when you're home with 5 children and your wife is out over there, out around the country doing all of these things? And this is what he said. He said, I don't speak Maori. This is what I give back to the culture. So that's another lesson, an important lesson that can be learned. And yes, I was on a flight from Edmonton, Alberta to Ontario, and I was sitting next to a guy who spoke French, and this 3-year-old girl would run up when the plane got off the ground, and seatbelts were off, and she would run up and she'd talk to her father, and it would all be in French. And then she'd run to the back, and she kept doing this, and then the stewardess said something to her, and she said something back in English, and I was intrigued immediately, and I asked the father, I said, where's she going? And he said, she's going back to where her mother is sitting. And we talked, and her mother was Danish. And he said his 3-year-old daughter spoke only Danish to her mother, only French to him, and English to everybody else. So it's not uncommon for children to code switch, what's called code switching. Where it becomes a problem is when they know that both parents speak English. And then it becomes a difficult task. Going back to the Hawaiians, there were kids that I spoke to who were in middle school years, and they said they never knew their teachers spoke English through 6 years of school. And by accident, once they found like Nairima, and one of the kids said, Nairima, I didn't know you spoke English. And that's the thing. And the last thing I'll say is, again, what has happened here is really historic. It takes a lot of work, and there's been some guidance for me. People don't realize how much I really know about language learning and the problems and navigating through those problems. I mean, Ellie can tell you, I went to her home and her son was speaking English back, and she didn't know what to do, and I kind of smiled and I said, just keep saying to him, I don't understand what you're saying in Gumbaynggirr. And what happened?
He immediately switched to Gumbaynggirr and stayed in Gumbaynggirr.
Yep, and it was that simple, and I can see those blocks and how to move through that. And that's where we get to the difference between theory and knowing how to put something into practice. I don't talk theory, and maybe that's why a lot of linguists don't or have issues with me, because they don't understand where this is coming from. And on Wednesday, I will give you more information